Viewer advisory. The events you are about to witness are based on a true story. Some scenes may be deeply unsettling for certain audiences. Viewer discretion is strongly recommended. The 911 call came in at 6:47 a.m. on what should have been the happiest day of Bianca Hormone's life. Her voice cracked through the dispatcher's headset, raw with panic and disbelief. "My fiancé is missing. He was supposed to marry me this morning." David Johnson, 24, had vanished without a trace from the one place he should have been safest, her father's house. His phone was dead. His car hadn't moved. The wedding dress, hanging in Bianca's closet, would never see its moment. But this wasn't about cold feet or second thoughts. David wasn't the kind of man who ran, and Bianca knew her father, Pastor Joseph Blair, better than anyone. Or so she thought. What started as a missing person report would unravel into something far more sinister. A story of manipulation, predatory behavior, a young man's desperate fight for survival against someone who was supposed to protect him. This is the story of how a wedding day became a crime scene, and how the truth almost died in a locked room with no witnesses. Tonight's story is one that will leave you rattled. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, let's begin. The love story between Bianca and David began like something out of a romance novel. They met at a youth leadership retreat in Atlanta during the summer of 2018. Bianca was there to make connections and challenge minds with her sharp intellect and bold opinions. David was there to learn, to grow, to find his place in the world as a young black man navigating faith and purpose. When Bianca stood up during a panel on family values and delivered one of her signature provocative takes, she expected pushback. Instead, she got David's voice from across the room. Calm, thoughtful, building on her ideas rather than tearing them down. He didn't try to diminish her fire. He helped it burn brighter. Their connection wasn't instant fireworks. It was something deeper, more sustainable. They exchanged subtle glances over boxed lunches, shared brief conversations between sessions. But it wasn't until months later when Bianca found David's social media that things truly began. A video of him mentoring teenage boys in Houston caught her attention. That same steady voice, that same gentle strength she remembered from the retreat. She messaged him. He messaged back. What followed were phone calls that stretched into the early morning hours, conversations about faith, mental health, family, and dreams that felt too big for their current realities. They built trust before they built romance, respect before they claimed love. By early 2021, David knew he wanted to marry her. On a quiet February evening at an open mic cafe in Houston, he took the stage and performed a poem written just for her. The proposal came in the final lines, and when he dropped to one knee, Bianca's yes came through tears of joy. She had been ready for months. But not everyone shared their enthusiasm. Joseph Blair, Bianca's father and longtime pastor of Greater Living Word Ministries, kept his distance from the engagement planning. It wasn't overt disapproval, just missed calls, canceled meetings, a subtle withdrawal that Bianca attributed to the natural difficulty of letting his only daughter go. Joseph had raised Bianca alone since her mother's death in 2013. He was respected, even revered, in their community. For nearly 2 decades, he had been the steady voice of moral authority, the man who baptized babies and buried elders, who counseled troubled marriages and guided lost souls back to righteousness. His sermons on traditional values, discipline, and masculine leadership packed the sanctuary every Sunday. To the outside world, Joseph Blair was everything a pastor should be: controlled, righteous, unshakable in his convictions. He mentored young men, teaching them about responsibility, urging abstinence, condemning weakness of character and indulgence of the flesh. Many left his office feeling sharper, stronger, more focused. Others left feeling confused, pressured to earn his approval in ways they couldn't quite articulate. But no one questioned Joseph Blair. His authority was absolute, his reputation spotless. He was the kind of man parents trusted with their children, wives trusted with their husbands' spiritual development, and communities trusted with their moral compass. That trust would prove to be his most dangerous weapon. When Bianca first brought David home in the summer of 2021, the meeting fell off from the start. Joseph welcomed them with cold politeness, barely engaging in conversation beyond a few odd comments. "You always this put together?" he asked David at one point. Later, "You wear cologne like that often?" Bianca laughed off her father's strangeness, but David felt the weight of Joseph's stare, the way his handshake lingered too long, the subtle tension that filled every silence. Still, he respected the man's position as Bianca's father and chose to give him the benefit of the doubt. That would be David's first mistake. Joseph reached out to David directly a few days after that initial meeting, offering spiritual guidance and mentorship. It made sense. Marriage was a big step, and preparing the future husband was part of pastoral duty. David agreed to meet for coffee, then agreed to help with church errands, then agreed to late-night phone calls about Scripture and responsibility. But the conversations weren't really about Scripture. They lingered in uncomfortable spaces, filled with personal compliments and probing questions. Joseph would tell David he carried himself well, that his voice had weight, that he was sharp for his age. The words never crossed clear lines, but they created an atmosphere David couldn't name. The touching started small, a hand on the shoulder that stayed too long, sitting unnecessarily close at church events, gifts that arrived without explanation. Expensive cufflinks left at David's door with no card, just Joseph's casual mention that he thought you could use something nice for the wedding. David began pulling back, declining invitations, keeping conversations short. But he never told Bianca. How could he explain that her beloved father was making him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't quite articulate? How could he risk destroying the relationship between the woman he loved and the man who raised her? His silence created space for something dangerous to grow. The night before the wedding, October 11th, 2022, David arrived at Joseph's house around 5:15 p.m. The plan was simple: finish the last-minute wedding preparations, get some rest, and wake up ready for the happiest day of their lives. Bianca was across town with her bridesmaids, and David would join his groomsmen in the morning. They worked quietly through the evening, checking sound equipment, finalizing seating charts, testing slide presentations. By 9:10 p.m., everything was complete. That's when Joseph suggested they have one final talk to settle their spirits before the big day. David followed him into the upstairs study. The door closed behind them. The lock clicked shut. Joseph stood between David and the exit and began speaking, but not about the wedding. He talked about struggling with things inside him that he couldn't suppress anymore. He said he'd tried to pray them away. Then he looked David in the eyes and made a demand that shattered everything. Just one night intimate between us. That's all I'm asking. When David refused and tried to leave, Joseph's facade dropped completely. The respected pastor became something else entirely. Violent, desperate, predatory. He shoved David backward into the desk, then delivered a punch that knocked him to the ground. Before David could recover, zip ties were around his wrists, binding him helplessly. What happened next was a nightmare of assault and terror that lasted through the night. Joseph's years of preaching about purity and righteousness meant nothing now. The man who had counseled against weakness and indulgence gave in to the darkest parts of himself, using his position of trust and physical advantage to take what David would never give. David fought when he could, endured when he had to, and waited for any chance to escape. That chance came near dawn when Joseph, exhausted from his night of violence, fell into a heavy sleep. David managed to work one hand free from the loosened restraints and quietly made his way to the kitchen. He found Joseph's phone and, with shaking fingers, called 911. His voice was barely a whisper, but his message was clear. "I need help. I've been assaulted. I'm trapped in a house with my attacker." Police arrived within minutes, finding David wounded but alive, and Joseph still sleeping upstairs. The evidence was overwhelming: David's injuries, the zip ties, Joseph's own confession when confronted with the reality of what he'd done. The man who had spent decades preaching about morality and righteousness was arrested for kidnapping and sexual assault. The wedding was canceled, but something more important was preserved: David's life and his chance to heal from this nightmare. Joseph Blair was sentenced to 25 years in prison after pleading guilty to avoid a trial that would have forced David to relive every horrific detail. The once respected pastor became just another predator behind bars, his reputation destroyed, his church dissolved, his legacy nothing but a cautionary tale about the danger of unchecked power and misplaced trust. Bianca stood by David throughout the legal process, her love unwavering even as she grappled with the truth about the man who raised her. They eventually married in a small ceremony, surrounded by people who truly loved and supported them. No church, no big celebration, just two people who had survived the worst and chose to build something beautiful together. David's courage to survive that night and testify about his experience helped other victims come forward. 3 more young men from Joseph's congregation revealed similar experiences of inappropriate behavior and manipulation. Justice wasn't just served for David. It was served for every young man who had ever felt uncomfortable in Joseph Blair's presence, but was too afraid to speak up. The case became a landmark prosecution, sending a clear message that predators can't hide behind positions of respect and authority. David Johnson didn't just survive. He helped ensure that Joseph Blair would never hurt anyone else again. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it requires incredible courage from survivors. But when it comes, it can change everything. David and Bianca are proof that love can survive even the darkest betrayal, and that speaking truth to power, no matter how terrifying, is always worth it. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you haven't already, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We upload new true crime content daily, covering cases you know and many you don't. Stick with us as we bring you more stories that deserve to be heard. See you in the next video.